The air in Marcus's research station carried the scent of aged paper and ozone, a comforting blend that spoke of forgotten centuries and digital exploration. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of weak sunlight that pierced the grimy window pane, illuminating the meticulous chaos of stacked texts, open folios, and the faint, rhythmic hum of his server rack. He preferred the quietude, the predictable rhythm of his own thoughts sifting through historical data, unburdened by the superficial demands of contemporary interaction. For Marcus, the past was a tangible landscape, more real and infinitely more compelling than the fleeting present. His current project, a comprehensive analysis of overlooked societal anxieties in late medieval Europe, demanded an unwavering focus, a reclusive dedication he embraced without reservation. His routine, a finely tuned instrument of scholarship, was abruptly fractured by the arrival of a thick, cream-colored envelope. It sat on his worn oak desk, stark against the sepia tones of his workspace, an unwelcome splash of modernity. The crest on the seal was unfamiliar, intricate, and utterly irrelevant to the historical narratives he meticulously reconstructed. He regarded it with a historian's detached curiosity, then a scholar's irritation. Interruptions were anathema. He opened it with a precise flick of his antique letter opener. The contents, however, demanded more than a dismissive glance. A formal letter from a solicitor, its language dense with legalistic jargon, informed him of the passing of a distant, practically unknown relative and, more unexpectedly, an inheritance. Blackwood Manor. The name resonated with a faint, chilling echo in the cavern of Marcus's historical memory. Not from any academic text, but from obscure regional folklore and scattered anecdotal accounts he'd once dismissed as provincial superstition. It was a place whispered about in hushed tones, a site of persistent, unverified legends of misfortune and inexplicable disappearances. The local narratives painted it as a malevolent presence, a place where the veil between worlds thinned. Marcus, a man whose life was built upon verifiable facts and documented evidence, scoffed internally. Such tales were the desperate attempts of an uneducated populace to explain the unexplainable, to imbue inanimate structures with supernatural agency. He saw only crumbling stone, damp wood, and the inevitable decay of neglected property. Yet, a determined flicker of academic interest stirred within him. This was not a pursuit of wealth. His needs were minimal. His comforts derived from intellect, not luxury. It was the possibility of a primary source, a tangible link to a historical oddity, that piqued his interest. To physically walk through a place so steeped in local legend, to perhaps uncover the mundane truths behind the supernatural fabrications, presented a unique, albeit inconvenient, research opportunity. He would go. He would observe. He would debunk. The journey was a gradual descent into isolation. The familiar urban sprawl receded, replaced by rolling hills that eventually gave way to dense, ancient woodlands. The road narrowed, the tarmac crumbling into gravel, then finally a barely maintained dirt track that snaked through a tunnel of skeletal trees. The driver, a taciturn man hired through the solicitor's firm, offered no conversation, his gaze fixed on the winding path ahead. Marcus appreciated the lack of small talk. Then, through a sudden break in the canopy, it appeared. A fortress of blackened stone and gnarled timber, it seemed less built than organically grown from the earth itself, its numerous gables and turrets like bony protrusions. A gate of wrought iron, elaborate and rusted, stood ajar, groaning faintly in the imperceptible breeze. It was an internal sensation. A prickle of unease he immediately attributed to the sheer age and neglect of the structure. The air here was heavy, still, carrying the faint, earthy scent of damp stone and something else, something subtly metallic and profoundly ancient, like forgotten blood or stagnant iron. The driver, having deposited a small leather bag containing Marcus's essentials, departed with a curt nod, the sound of his engine fading swiftly, leaving Marcus utterly alone. The manor loomed. The wind, which had been a gentle murmur in the trees, seemed to die entirely within the manor's immediate vicinity, creating a pocket of breathless anticipation. Marcus's historian's mind cataloged the architectural details, the signs of centuries of habitation and disrepair. But another, more primal part of him registered the sheer weight of the place. Yet, as he pushed the door inward, the sound of the ancient hinges groaning like a long-held breath, Marcus could not shake the feeling that he was not merely entering a house, but rather stepping into something that had been waiting. The old research station, with its familiar scent of ozone and aged paper, was a memory now, a distant anchor. Marcus had severed that tie, bringing only the essential core of his work to the manor. Boxes, heavy with books, archived documents, and his minimalist digital equipment, lined the cavernous entrance hall. The air here was different, thick with the smell of damp earth and decaying wood, a scent that clung to his clothes and hair even before he fully stepped inside. He chose a room on the second floor, overlooking a neglected garden. It was large, with tall, grimy windows and a fireplace choked with soot. Peeling wallpaper, a muted floral pattern of indeterminate age, suggested a forgotten elegance. This would be his new research station. With methodical precision, Marcus began the arduous task of unpacking. Each box was a universe of information, meticulously labeled and categorized. He stacked volumes of local history, biographies of obscure gentry, and architectural surveys onto makeshift shelves. Planks laid across overturned crates. The whir of his laptop, once a constant companion, now seemed unnaturally loud in the silence of the manor. Hours bled into one another. He worked with a focused intensity, arranging his materials, setting up his digital archive, cleaning the grimy surfaces with a dry cloth. The physical act of organizing grounded him, a tangible assertion of order against the manor's pervasive disarray. As he reached for a particularly heavy tome on regional land deeds, a sudden distinct chill permeated the air around him. It was localized, a pocket of frigid air that seemed to press against his skin, raising gooseflesh. Marcus paused, his hand hovering. He glanced toward the window, then the closed door. The glass was old, single-paned, and the door had a noticeable gap at its base. A draft, he concluded. The house was ancient, poorly insulated. He shivered, pulling his sweater tighter, and continued his work. Later, as twilight bled through the dirty panes, painting the room in shades of bruised purple and gray, Marcus knelt beside a stack of local parish records. He was engrossed in a particularly dense passage about property disputes from the late 17th century. A faint sound, like dry leaves rustling across flagstones, drifted from the hallway. He ignored it, attributing it to the wind. It was indistinct, a breathy murmur of syllables he couldn't quite grasp. He froze, his head cocked. He waited, straining his ears, but heard nothing beyond the distant creak of the house settling. Old pipes, he reasoned, or the wind working its way through a loose slate on the roof. His mind, trained in logical deduction, dismissed the ephemeral sensation. He returned to his records, making a note in his digital file. When he looked up again, a small, leather-bound volume, one he had placed precisely at the center of his makeshift desk, had shifted. It now sat angled, its spine slightly askew, almost as if someone had nudged it. Marcus stared at it. He had a precise memory for the placement of his materials. He had just set it down, a moment ago, after consulting its index. He picked it up, recentering it with a small frown. Perhaps he had bumped the table without realizing, or the surface itself was uneven. He mentally chastised himself for his momentary lapse in attention, attributing it to fatigue. His fingers, still sore from unpacking, grazed against a loose panel in the wainscoting near the fireplace. It gave way with a faint click. Curiosity, a driving force for any historian, compelled him. Behind the panel, nestled in a small, dusty cavity, lay a slim, decaying wooden box. Inside, wrapped in brittle, yellowed linen, were two small notebooks and a sheaf of letters. The paper was fragile, the ink faded to sepia. The first notebook, bound in rough hide, bore no title, only a date, 1878. Marcus carefully opened it. The handwriting was spidery, almost frantic in places. He began to read, his brow furrowing. The initial entries were mundane, observations about the weather, garden yields. They are not sounds precisely, but a pressure in the mind, a constant murmuring at the edge of thought. The writer, identified only by initials EH at the bottom of a particularly desperate-sounding page, spoke of a growing weariness, a struggle against an unseen weight. It drains the will, EH had scrawled, and twists the memory. Marcus paused, turning a page. The writer, a woman, mentioned recurring dreams and a pervasive sense of being observed, even in empty rooms. He closed the notebook, the old paper crumbling slightly at the edges. Such accounts were not uncommon in the annals of isolated estates. He saw them as fascinating historical documents, testaments to the psychological toll of reclusive life in a bygone era, rather than any literal truth. These were the struggles of individuals, not the malevolence of stone and mortar. He carefully placed the box on a corner of his desk, intending to transcribe the contents later. The only light now came from his laptop screen, casting an eerie blue glow on the stacks of books and the ancient walls. Marcus shivered again, a longer, more involuntary tremor this time. He told himself it was the exhaustion, the demanding labor of the day, the fading light. Marcus pushed the brittle page aside, a faint tremor in his fingers that he attributed to the cold seeping from the stones. The previous owner's sister had written of a peculiar melancholy and a disquiet of the soul emanating from the very walls, sentiments that Marcus, a historian grounded in empirical fact, initially dismissed as the melodramatic musings of an overly sensitive woman. He had established the grand, dust-sheeted hall as his primary research station, its vast emptiness now filled with stacks of archival boxes and the hum of his laptop. The sheer volume of material required a methodical approach, a bulwark against the creeping stillness of the manor. As the afternoon light faded, replaced by the yellow glow of his desk lamp, a new sound surfaced. It was indistinct at first, a faint rustle that might have been the wind sighing through a loose pane, or the old house settling on its foundations. He paused, pen hovering over a note, and listened. Nothing. Just the soft click of the grandfather clock in the distant foyer, an insistent rhythm in the profound silence. Marcus shook his head, a small, dismissive gesture. The mind, he mused, was adept at manufacturing patterns from randomness, especially in isolation. He returned to a faded diary from the mid-19th century, penned by a young bride. Her early entries brimmed with joy, describing the manor's architectural grandeur. But as the weeks progressed, a subtle shift occurred. The handwriting became less steady, the observations more fragmented. He spun around, knife clattering against the cutting board. He stood motionless, straining to hear it again, his breath held tight in his chest. His skepticism warred with a nascent apprehension. Overworked, sleep-deprived. Sleep, however, offered no respite. The nights became a kaleidoscope of vivid, disturbing imagery. He dreamt of the manor's walls pressing in, not just physically, but psychically. He heard the faint, echoing sound of weeping, the dry rustle of forgotten silk, the creak of floorboards above his head when he knew no one was there. He would wake with a gasp, his heart hammering against his ribs, the taste of dust and old fear on his tongue. The dream logic bled into his waking hours, making the manor feel less like a structure and more like a living entity observing him. Driven by a growing, unsettling curiosity, Marcus delved deeper into the manor's archives, specifically focusing on its previous inhabitants. The young bride, after 2 years in the manor, had been found wandering the grounds, incoherent, her mind fractured. He was eventually taken away, never to return. A generation later, a reclusive scholar who had inherited the property and immersed himself in its history had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only a frantic, unfinished manuscript filled with increasingly deranged scribblings about the house's hunger and the thinning veil. Another owner, a prosperous merchant, had been found dead in the grand hall, an antique letter opener clutched in his hand. His death ruled a suicide despite no prior signs of despondency. Each case, separated by decades or even centuries, shared a common thread: prolonged isolation within the manor's walls, preceding a descent into madness, disappearance, or self-inflicted death. The rational explanations he clung to, coincidence, the stresses of isolated living, pre-existing conditions, felt increasingly flimsy against the weight of the evidence. And he was now part of its history. He folded the letter precisely, tucking it back into its brittle envelope. Such florid expressions were common in historical correspondence, often disguising mundane anxieties. Yet the air in the library, already cool, seemed to possess a deeper chill, one that settled not on his skin, but beneath it. As he passed a tall, ornate mirror, he caught a flicker at its periphery, a movement, too quick and indistinct to be anything but a trick of light or weary eyes. He paused, turning fully to face the glass. His own reflection, pale and tired, stared back. Nothing else. He dismissed it, attributing the momentary visual distortion to the ancient, imperfect silvering of the mirror itself. Later, in his designated research station, a meticulously organized chamber off the main library, equipped with a portable scanner and archival boxes, Marcus immersed himself in the meticulously preserved journals of a former resident, a scholar of obscure botany from the late 19th century. The scholar's early entries detailed meticulous observations of local flora. Later ones became increasingly fragmented, punctuated by strange, non-sequitur descriptions of interior spaces and unsettling dreams. Marcus transcribed a particularly disjointed passage concerning the creeping damp of forgotten sorrow, when a sudden sharp scent filled the room. It was the distinct aroma of lamp oil and something metallic, like old pennies, overlaid with a faint cloying sweetness, reminiscent of wilting roses. He sniffed, perplexed. There were no oil lamps in the room, nor any roses, fresh or otherwise. The smell intensified, a physical pressure behind his sinuses, then vanished as abruptly as it appeared, leaving only the faint, familiar scent of aged paper. He frowned, running a hand over his brow. The manor was old. Perhaps some peculiar atmospheric condition had stirred up a phantom odor. He tried to refocus on the journal, but a faint, high-pitched keening sound, almost imperceptible, seemed to vibrate in the very timbers of the house. It was a sound of profound desolation, muffled and distant, yet undeniably present. He held his breath, listening intently, but it faded, leaving him questioning if he had truly heard it or merely imagined it. He felt catalogued, weighed. He walked to the window, pushing aside a heavy velvet curtain. The grounds were shrouded in a deepening twilight, the gnarled trees silhouetted like grasping skeletal fingers against the bruised sky. As he gazed out, the glass of the window pane shimmered, not with condensation, but with a momentary internal distortion. For an instant, the twilight landscape outside vanished, replaced by a vivid, sun-drenched scene. A woman, dressed in a faded blue gown, stood weeping by a stone wall, her face obscured by her hands. Her shoulders shook with silent, agonizing grief. A child's small wooden toy lay discarded at her feet. Marcus stumbled back from the window, his breath catching in his throat. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drum against his ribs. He pressed his palms to his eyes, trying to clear the image, to force rationality back into his perception. He was a historian, not a mystic. He needed to rest. The keening sound returned, louder this time, accompanied by a distant rhythmic thudding, like something heavy being dragged across an upper floor. He paused at the threshold of his room, listening. The sounds were not merely echoes. They felt present, as if the manor itself were reliving some traumatic event. He could almost feel the weight of the dragged object, the desperation behind the mournful cry. He repeated these rationalizations like a mantra, but the conviction behind them was fraying. He entered his room, the sounds abruptly ceasing the moment the door clicked shut behind him. The sudden silence was more unsettling than the noise. He felt an intense, unseen presence in the room, a pressure that seemed to displace the very air. He felt watched, judged, a new data point in an ancient, malevolent ledger. As he reached out to pull back the covers, his fingers brushed against the cool, embroidered fabric of a pillow. A jolt, like static electricity, shot through his arm. Simultaneously, an image flashed behind his eyes, clearer and more immersive than the one at the window. He was no longer Marcus. He was standing in this very room, but the furniture was different, older. He's truly gone. The words were not heard with his ears, but felt, a direct injection into his consciousness. The despair was overwhelming, a crushing weight that threatened to buckle his knees. The air tasted of salt and desperation. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the sensation vanished. Marcus staggered back, grasping the bedpost for support. His heart was now a frantic, irregular rhythm against his sternum. This was not a trick of light or sound. This was a direct intrusion. The manor was not merely haunted by memories. It was actively replaying them, bleeding them into his own mind. He had not merely seen a past event. For a terrifying moment, he had been a participant in its sorrow. The house was not just an edifice. It was an entity, and it was beginning to consume him, blurring the lines between his reality and its own tormented past. His carefully constructed skepticism shattered, leaving only a raw, throbbing fear. He had attributed the woman's words to the melancholic tendencies common in the Victorian era, a susceptibility to romanticized gloom. Yet, as the days blurred into a seamless tapestry of dust motes dancing in the manor's perpetual twilight, Marcus found himself revisiting those phrases, not with skepticism, but with a strange, nascent understanding. He had intended to leave. The initial plan involved periodic trips to the nearest town for supplies, perhaps a visit to the local archives, a specific research station known for its extensive collection of regional land deeds. But the impulse to depart had grown faint, like a distant signal fading into static. Each morning, the thought of packing a bag, starting the car, navigating the winding, overgrown lane, felt increasingly onerous. It was not a physical barrier, not an explicit command, but a profound internal inertia that rooted him firmly within the manor's stone embrace. His phone, a device once tethering him to the world of academic deadlines and social obligations, now lay mostly ignored on a corner table, its battery often depleted. He remembered vaguely an intention to call the solicitor regarding the estate's more complex legalities. He had even picked it up once, thumbed through the contacts, but the screen had suddenly gone dark, the charge having inexplicably vanished despite being plugged in hours earlier. Another time, he managed to dial, only to be met with a series of clicks and a dial tone that dissolved into a low, persistent hum, as if the line itself was struggling against some unseen interference. He tried emailing a colleague about a collaborative paper, tapping out a few desultory lines on his laptop. The message appeared to send, but no reply ever materialized. He checked his spam folder, then his sent folder, then simply closed the lid, a peculiar sense of relief washing over him. The outside world, with its demands and distractions, felt increasingly distant, irrelevant. The manor itself seemed to coalesce around him, its vast, shadowed rooms no longer oppressive in their emptiness, but possessing a peculiar, almost comforting weight. He found himself neglecting his personal well-being without conscious intent. Meals became an afterthought, often forgotten entirely, or consumed standing, directly from a tin, his mind already drifting back to the tattered ledgers and brittle manuscripts spread across the great dining table. His beard grew unruly. His clothes acquired the same faint, musty aroma as the manor's textiles, and the sensation of clean linen against his skin was a distant memory. He slept fitfully, often waking at odd hours, drawn by an inexplicable urge to explore another forgotten corner, to unearth another scrap of the manor's obscured past. Yet, despite the erratic sleep, a profound weariness settled deep in his bones, a draining that no amount of rest seemed to alleviate. He had marked the location of the regional research station on a physical map, a relic he'd unearthed in the manor's study. The station held records that could confirm the manor's earliest documented owners, perhaps even shed light on the obscure cult mentioned in one of the more cryptic journals. He had even set a date, a specific morning for the drive. But that morning, a dense, unseasonal fog had rolled in, clinging to the ancient trees that lined the drive, making visibility almost zero. He had looked out from a tall window, observing the swirling white, and felt a profound lack of urgency, almost a quiet satisfaction, as if the manor itself approved of his continued presence. Another day, he thought. He intended to step outside, to walk the grounds, to feel the wind on his face. But an invisible tether seemed to hold him, a subtle but undeniable resistance. The air just beyond the threshold felt thinner, less substantial, almost hostile. The house had begun to feel less like a structure and more like an organism. Its vast, empty spaces no longer echoed with his footsteps, but seemed to absorb them, to cushion them. The cold stones no longer felt inanimate, but possessed a peculiar warmth that seeped into his skin, a steady, low thrum that resonated with his own pulse. He did not question this behavior. It felt natural, a logical extension of his deep dive into the archives. He was no longer Marcus, the skeptical historian. He was becoming Marcus, the manor's inhabitant, its devoted chronicler, its newest fixture. The outside world, with its fleeting demands and ephemeral concerns, was a concept increasingly difficult to recall, dissolving into the pervasive, comforting gloom that now defined his existence. He was not trapped, he told himself. He was simply... And the manor, in its vast, silent way, seemed to agree. Sunlight, when it managed to penetrate the grime of the leaded windows, cast long, dusty shafts across the stacks of crumbling ledgers and brittle correspondence. Yet the light today felt different, thinner, as if strained through an unseen medium. Marcus, who prided himself on his intellectual detachment, felt a creeping lassitude, a disinclination to continue that was entirely alien to his nature. He found himself staring at the elegant script, not analyzing its historical context, but experiencing the sentiment directly. A disquiet of the soul. The phrase settled over him like a shroud. He rubbed his temples, a faint ache thrumming behind his eyes. Later, he rose to stretch, intending to retrieve a specific volume from a shelf across the room. The distance seemed greater than he remembered. He took a step, then another, his boots echoing with an unusual hollowness. The oak floorboards, usually firm beneath his weight, felt marginally softer, almost spongy in places. He reached the shelf, his fingers brushing against the spines of books, and paused. This particular section, he recalled, held the detailed inventory of the manor's original furnishings. But the titles he now saw were unfamiliar. Volumes on agricultural yields, on shipping manifests, on colonial trade routes. His own meticulous organizational system had vanished. A cold dread, sharp and sudden, pierced the languid fog. He blinked, the titles blurring, then sharpening again. No, they were his books. The inventory. He must have misremembered the shelf. He shook his head, a flicker of irritation overriding the unease. He left the research station, aiming for the grand staircase to descend for a cup of tea. But the corridor he entered felt subtly wrong. The tapestry depicting a hunting scene, usually hanging halfway down the hall, was gone. In its place, a bare patch of ancient wallpaper, faded to a sickly yellow, peeled at the edges. The corridor itself seemed to stretch, the far end receding with each step he took. He pressed a hand against the wall, the plaster rough and gritty beneath his palm. This was not the main corridor. He was certain of it. Yet, where else could it lead? He had come directly from the research station. A wave of nausea washed over him. He closed his eyes, counted to 10, then opened them. The corridor remained, long and foreboding. He turned back, intending to re-enter the research station. In its place stood a tall, narrow archway, draped with cobwebs, leading into absolute blackness. This was impossible. He knew this house. He had studied its blueprints. Perhaps he had taken a wrong turn, a door he had never noticed before. But the manor was not that large, not labyrinthine, not like this. He walked back down the elongated corridor, his steps hesitant, his gaze darting. Bartholomew, who had meticulously documented the manor's finances, who had obsessed over the falling timber prices. "The market is turning against us." A voice, not quite his own, echoed in his mind. "The damp, it will rot the foundations. We must secure the north wing." Marcus frowned. These were Bartholomew's anxieties, not his. His own concern was the preservation of historical data, the interpretation of past lives. Yet the worry about the north wing felt viscerally present, a tight knot in his stomach. He stumbled into a room he did not recognize, a small windowless space dominated by a heavy iron-bound chest. The ledgers, they must be in here. He reached for the clasp, his fingers trembling. His name was Marcus. He was a historian. He was researching the manor. He was not Bartholomew. He looked at his hands. They were his hands, strong, unblemished. He saw the manor not as a subject of study, but as a burden, a drain on his dwindling resources. The upkeep, it will be my undoing. He spent what felt like hours wandering, each turn presenting a new anomaly. The manor was no longer a static structure. It was a fluid, malevolent entity, reconfiguring itself around him, blurring the lines of its own reality. And his. He ran a hand over the rough wood of a table. This was not his table. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and old parchment, a smell that now felt like his own personal atmosphere. He sat on a stool, his mind a frantic, desperate scramble. Marcus. He felt their melancholy, their financial anxieties, their desperate attempts to maintain the crumbling facade. He was them, and they were him. The spiraling staircase descended into a profound chill, each stone step slick with an unseen moisture that clung to Marcus's boots. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and something acrid, metallic, a smell entirely alien to the ancient manor's usual aroma of dust and decaying velvet. He reached the bottom, his hand finding a cold, rough-hewn wall, not the polished wood or faded plaster he expected. A low, persistent hum vibrated through the floor, a sound like distant, immense machinery working tirelessly beneath the earth. Ahead, a faint, flickering light pulsed, illuminating a narrow corridor carved from what appeared to be solid rock. Marcus moved forward, his breath misting in the frigid air. The corridor opened into a vast, cavernous space, its walls crude but reinforced with iron beams that dripped condensation. This was no cellar. This was a subterranean complex, vast and disquieting. Rows of metallic tables stretched into the gloom, some still bearing archaic equipment. Flickering monitors displaying static, complex arrays of wires leading to nothing. Glass vials filled with desiccated, unidentifiable contents. This was a research station, stark and abandoned, yet humming with a residual malevolent energy. Marcus's historian's instinct, dulled by days of temporal disarray, sharpened with a sudden, alarming clarity. Dust lay thick everywhere, disturbed only by his own passage. On one table, beneath a film of grime, he found a collection of bound journals, their covers warped and stained. Beside them, a stack of faded schematics and diagrams. He picked up the topmost journal. The script was cramped, frantic, yet meticulously detailed. The entries documented observations, measurements, hypotheses. Marcus's eyes scanned the pages, his mind struggling to process the implications. The author, an unnamed predecessor, had charted fluctuations in the manor's internal energy, correlating them with periods of inhabitant distress. There were graphs, unsettling in their precision, showing a direct inverse relationship. As the inhabitants' cognitive functions declined, as their memories frayed, as their sense of self deteriorated, the manor's measured energy output increased. Marcus flipped to a page filled with sketches. Crude, yet horrifyingly illustrative, they depicted a network of conduits, not pipes or wires, but ethereal tendrils emanating from the very fabric of the house. These tendrils, the captions explained, infiltrated the minds of those within, siphoning away their most cherished recollections, their defining experiences, their very essence. The journal described it as a temporal and psychological harvesting, a process by which the entity, the manor, grew stronger, more defined, more real, while its victims faded into spectral echoes. He remembered the shifting portraits, the disappearing rooms, the faces he almost recognized but couldn't quite place. It was the feeding. It detailed the manor's digestion process. The entity didn't merely consume memories, it integrated them, weaving them into its own fabric, strengthening its hold on reality, distorting time and space within its walls. The more it consumed, the more powerful its manifestations became, the more real its illusions, the more potent its ability to erase and rewrite. A diagram showed a central nexus, deep within the manor's foundations, a pulsating core that drew sustenance from the cognitive energy of its inhabitants. It was a parasitic organism, ancient and vast, using the house as its physical manifestation. He wasn't just in a haunted house. He was inside a living, malevolent being. The hum in the research station intensified, throbbing now, a low, guttural growl that resonated in his teeth. He understood now. The manor wasn't just consuming the past, it was consuming him. The realization was a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs. The horror was not merely external, it was internal, a slow, insidious erosion from within. He was trapped inside a predator, and it was savoring every bite. He reached the bottom, his hand finding a grimy iron latch set into a solid oak door. It gave way with a groan that echoed through the subterranean passage, revealing a vast, low-ceilinged chamber. This was the research station. The space was a cavern of forgotten knowledge, illuminated by a sickly green glow emanating from a few scattered, dust-caked glass tubes mounted on the walls. Rusted instruments lay strewn across heavy wooden tables, their purpose obscured by layers of grime and time. Skeletal frameworks of what might have been experimental apparatuses loomed in the shadows, draped in cobwebs that shimmered like brittle lace. The metallic tang in the air intensified, mingling with the dry, papery scent of ancient manuscripts piled high on precarious shelves. A strange clarity pierced through the house's pervasive haze. For a fleeting moment, Marcus felt himself again, not the pliable vessel the manor sought to mold. This was not merely an old house. It was a hungry, conscious entity, and he was its latest meal. The thought, raw and terrifying, ignited a desperate spark of resistance within him. He had to fight. His eyes scanned the cavernous room, moving with an urgency that felt alien to his recently sluggish mind. The house, sensing his defiance, seemed to press in. A faint, almost imperceptible hum vibrated through the stone floor, a low thrum that spoke of immense latent power. Its pages were filled with intricate, indecipherable symbols and crude anatomical drawings that seemed to shift and distort in the flickering light. He moved from table to table, his breath catching in his throat. One section of the research station was dedicated to preserved specimens. Jars filled with cloudy liquid held things that were once organic, now grotesquely altered. A three-headed bird, its feathers fused into a single calcified mass, a human hand, unnaturally elongated, with claws instead of nails. His gaze fell upon a small, unassuming wooden box tucked beneath a pile of brittle, yellowed maps. He pulled it out, the wood surprisingly smooth beneath his fingers. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, lay a single obsidian shard. It was no larger than his thumb, perfectly smooth on one side, jagged and crystalline on the other. The shard pulsed with a faint internal luminescence, mirroring the green glow of the room. It felt utterly alien, yet intensely resonant, as if it held a fragment of the manor's essence. Beneath the obsidian, a folded piece of parchment lay hidden. He carefully unfolded it. The script was ancient, but unlike the indecipherable symbols, this was a language he recognized, albeit archaic. It detailed a ritual, a process of severing the connection between the entity and its physical manifestation, the manor itself. The ritual was not about destroying the house directly, but about isolating its core, rendering it inert, starving it. The parchment outlined specific actions, a precise sequence of incisions into the stone, performed at a particular convergence of celestial bodies, using an iron blade forged in the manor's own heat. It spoke of a painful extraction, a transference of the entity's accumulated memories and stolen life force into the stone, which would then become a prison. The house roared, not with sound, but with an internal pressure that threatened to collapse his thoughts. The air grew impossibly thick, the metallic scent now overwhelming, tasting like old blood on his tongue. He could feel its anger, its desperate attempt to reassert control, to drown this dangerous knowledge. But the shard, in his grip, seemed to offer a momentary shield, a tiny pocket of defiance against the overwhelming psychic assault. He clutched it tighter, the jagged edge digging into his skin, a small, welcome pain. The path was terrifying, a gamble with his very being, but it was a path nonetheless. He had found a weapon and a horrifying ritual. The obsidian in Marcus's hand vibrated, a low, resonant thrum that seemed to echo in his bones. The metallic tang in the air intensified, coppery and thick, as if the very atmosphere had begun to bleed. He tasted it on his tongue, a phantom sensation of old, clotted iron. The pressure he had felt earlier now solidified, a crushing weight that bore down on his skull, threatening to squeeze his thoughts into a pulp. This was no longer just an oppressive atmosphere. It was a deliberate assault. A low groan emanated from the floorboards beneath him, not the settling of old timber, but something deeper, more guttural, like a living thing shifting its weight. The grand staircase before him, a familiar path he had traversed countless times, seemed to ripple. Steps buckled, then resettled with an audible crack, as if straining to maintain their form. Marcus took a cautious step back, his gaze sweeping the ornate yet now threatening hall. Then the doors began to move. Not a gentle swing, but a violent, synchronized slamming. The heavy oak portal to the drawing room crashed shut with a sound like a thunderclap, vibrating through the stone walls. Across the hall, the library doors, which he had left ajar, slammed closed, the latch clicking with an unnerving finality. Marcus felt a surge of adrenaline, a cold certainty that this was no structural decay. The house was reacting. It was fighting back. He needed to find the source, the core of this malevolence, before it consumed him entirely. He turned towards a corridor he knew led to the older sections, where the most unsettling discoveries had been made. As he approached, the passage seemed to narrow. The walls, once comfortably distant, now felt closer, breathing in. The wallpaper patterns swirling into indistinct blurs that tugged at his peripheral vision. He pushed forward, determination hardening his features. Suddenly, a thick, heavy curtain, one he didn't recall ever seeing in this passage, dropped from the ceiling with a muffled thud, completely blocking his path. Marcus reached out, his fingers brushing the fabric. It felt strangely coarse, almost bristly, like matted hair. The house was playing with him, mocking his attempts at escape or progress. He was no longer in the manor. He stood in a vast, sterile room, all white walls and gleaming chrome. The air smelled of disinfectant and ozone. He was at the research station, surrounded by humming machinery and stacks of neatly organized files. A colleague, a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes he vaguely remembered from a forgotten past, stood before him, her face contorted in a silent scream, her mouth opening and closing without a sound. Her hands, pale and thin, clawed at her own throat, leaving no mark. The humming of the machinery grew louder, distorting into a deafening shriek that tore at his eardrums. He tried to speak, to ask her what was wrong, but his throat was constricted, his voice trapped. He reached out to her, but his hand passed through her as if she were made of smoke. The scent of disinfectant gave way to the metallic tang of old blood. Marcus gasped, lurching forward, his hands slamming against the impenetrable velvet curtain. The house was not just showing him things. It was implanting them, weaving his own fractured memories into its terrifying tapestry. It wasn't just consuming his sanity. It was using his past against him, twisting the comfort of memory into instruments of fear. He heard a distinct, wet thump from behind the velvet curtain, as if something heavy and soft had fallen. He pressed his ear to the fabric, but heard only the low, internal thrum of the house, a predatory purr. He understood now. The house wasn't trying to scare him away. It was trying to break him down, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but an empty vessel, ready for absorption. He would not allow it. He would find its heart, or he would die trying. The obsidian felt heavier than ever, a tangible weight against the burgeoning madness. He would find another way through. The obsidian in his hand vibrated, a low, resonant thrum that seemed to echo in his bones, threatening to splinter them from within. He tasted it on his tongue, a phantom sensation of old, clotted iron, and the taste was no longer phantom. It was real, a dry, bitter residue clinging to his palate. He pushed forward, his determination a brittle shield against the encroaching dread. The grand staircase, once a symbol of the manor's decayed elegance, now seemed to writhe, its banister twisting into grotesque skeletal forms. Shadows stretched and contracted with a life of their own, coiling around the pillars like hungry serpents. He could hear it now, a low, collective moan emanating from the very stones, a symphony of ancient suffering. Each step he took on the creaking floorboards felt like a transgression, an invasion the house resented with palpable force. His path led him through a section of the manor he had previously dismissed as a mere service wing, a labyrinth of forgotten pantries and sculleries. Here, the decay was absolute. The scent of mildew, damp earth, and something indescribably stale like forgotten dreams choked the air. He found the hidden passage not through any logical deduction, but by a sudden jarring shift in the floorboards beneath his feet, a subtle give that no ordinary decay could explain. A section of the pantry wall, disguised by years of grime, swung inward with a groan that sounded suspiciously like a sigh. Beyond lay a narrow descending corridor, unlit and reeking of ozone and something akin to scorched memory. He emerged into a cavernous subterranean chamber. This was it. The air here was thick, almost viscous, shimmering with an unseen energy. This was not a cellar, nor a crypt. This was the research station. The chamber was vast, its ceiling lost in perpetual gloom, yet illuminated by an intermittent, sickly green luminescence emanating from a complex array of devices. Copper wiring, tarnished but clearly functional, snaked across the floor and up the walls, connecting various bizarre mechanisms. There were no comfortable chairs, no sterile surfaces, no modern instruments. This was a place of archaic, terrifying purpose. At the very heart of the research station stood a colossal obsidian structure, easily 10 feet tall, multifaceted and uneven, like a monstrous geode. It thrummed with a deep, resonant frequency that vibrated through the floor and up into Marcus's teeth, making his jaw ache. From its surface, faint, translucent wisps of light, like vaporous memories, were being drawn inward, absorbed. As he watched, one of these wisps solidified for a fleeting moment into the recognizable, terrified face of the manor's previous owner. A fleeting image of a woman screaming, her eyes wide with uncomprehending horror, before dissolving into the obsidian mass. This was the core. This was how it fed. Not on blood, but on the very essence of consciousness, on the vivid, potent energy of fear and memory. As he stepped closer, the house retaliated with a ferocity that threatened to tear his mind apart. The metallic taste became overwhelming, choking him, the thrumming in the obsidian threatening to shatter his bones. You are a memory, waiting to be consumed. Marcus staggered, gripping the obsidian shard so tightly his knuckles turned white. His plan, conceived in moments of clarity amidst the house's encroaching madness, was a desperate gamble. He had theorized that if the house fed on memory and consciousness, it might be susceptible to a concentrated surge of a different kind of energy, a chaotic, disruptive force that would overload its system. The obsidian in his hand, he believed, could be the conduit. He saw a small, perfectly carved recess on the colossal obsidian structure, a matching indentation for the shard he held. It glowed faintly, invitingly. With a guttural cry, Marcus raised the obsidian shard. The chamber roared. The glass tubes within the research station began to crack, the viscous fluids within them bubbling furiously. The faces of past inhabitants flashed across the colossal obsidian, their screams soundless but palpable. A blinding flash of green light erupted, followed by a deafening shriek that was not sound, but pure, concentrated agony. The entire research station convulsed. The obsidian shard, now lodged in the core, began to glow with an intense, chaotic energy, a maelstrom of conflicting forces. He had initiated it. The final, desperate confrontation had begun. He lay there, disoriented, his mind a battlefield, his very identity dissolving, as the research station shuddered around him, threatening to collapse and consume everything within its terrifying embrace. Marcus staggered, gripping the obsidian shard so tightly his knuckles turned white. He had theorized that if the house fed on memory and consciousness, it might be susceptible to a concentrated nullification, a point of absolute, unyielding blankness, a void of will that it could not absorb, a pure anti-memory. The shard, volcanic glass, represented raw, unformed earth, antithetical to the house's cultivated parasitic intellect. It was a fragment of the world before memory, before consciousness, a weapon against the very essence of the entity that consumed him. His breath hitched, a ragged sound in the suffocating silence of the grand hall. The air itself felt thick, like viscous fluid, pressing against his skin, seeping into his lungs. The manor, he now understood, was not merely a structure, but a vast, intricate mind. Its walls the convoluted pathways of an ancient, insatiable hunger. He remembered the sterile, quiet hum of the research station where he had once spent countless hours, meticulously cataloging historical anomalies, dissecting ancient texts. The image flashed, crisp and clear, a beacon of order against the encroaching chaos. The cool metal surfaces, the precise angles of the equipment, the smell of ozone and old paper. A sanctuary of logic. The house, sensing his focus, recoiled, then surged. The memory rippled, distorted, the gleaming surfaces of the research station twisting into grotesque, reflective eyes, the hum replaced by a low, guttural growl that vibrated through the very stones beneath his feet. Marcus clenched his jaw, forcing the image of the research station to hold, a shield against the house's invasive tendrils. He had to find its core, the nexus of its hunger. It wasn't the clock itself, he realized, but the space behind it, a focal point where the house's temporal distortions seemed to coalesce. He moved with agonizing slowness, each step a battle against an unseen current that sought to drag his back, to dissolve his resolve. The floorboards groaned beneath his weight, not with age, but with a deliberate, protesting moan. Fragments of the house's vast stolen memory bank manifested to distract, to overwhelm. He ignored them, his gaze fixed on the clock. The air grew heavy with the scent of dust and something else, something metallic and acrid, like old blood mixed with ozone. He could feel the energy now, a faint rhythmic pulse, like a slow, ancient heartbeat, emanating from within the wall behind it. This was it. Raising the obsidian shard, Marcus focused every atom of his dwindling consciousness, every sliver of his remaining self, into a singular burning point of defiance. He was not a memory to be devoured. He was not a consciousness to be absorbed. He was Marcus, and he would not yield. With a guttural cry that tore from his throat, he plunged the shard forward, aiming for the pulsing nexus he felt within the wall. The obsidian point met resistance, not of stone, but of something yielding yet incredibly dense, like piercing solidified thought. A high, keening wail erupted from the very fabric of the house. A sound that was not sound, but pure, agonizing psychic feedback that slammed into Marcus's mind. He screamed, his body seizing, muscles locking. He saw himself, a younger Marcus, sitting at a desk in the research station, poring over an ancient map, his brow furrowed in concentration. Then the image flickered, the research station desk becoming the house's dining table, the map transforming into a swirling vortex of faces. The house was trying to assimilate his final act, to make even his defiance a part of its endless meal. But he held fast, the obsidian shard driven deep. A tremor ran through the entire manor, a seismic shudder that vibrated through his bones, threatening to liquefy him. Dust rained from the ceiling, ancient plaster crumbling. The keening intensified, becoming a monstrous roar, a sound of profound pain and rage. Then, abruptly, the world went silent. The tremors ceased. The acrid smell dissipated. Marcus stood, panting, the obsidian shard still buried in the wall. He felt different. He extracted the shard, its tip now glowing with a faint internal light, like a captured ember. The wall where he had struck remained intact, but a faint, intricate pattern, like a spider web of obsidian veins, had spread from the point of impact, pulsing with that same dim light. He looked around the hall. It was still the grand hall, but subtly altered. He felt a connection to it, a strange resonance that was both alien and intimate. He reached out, touching a dusty velvet curtain, and a fleeting sensation, a ghost of a memory not his own, brushed against his mind. A child's laughter, the clinking of teacups. It was faint, distant, no longer overwhelming, but present. Marcus was no longer fighting the house. He was, or perhaps, it was now a part of him. He had inflicted a wound, yes, a deep, disruptive blow to its core. But in doing so, he had not escaped its grasp. He had merely altered the nature of his absorption. He felt the house, not as an external force, but as an extension of his own senses, a vast, echoing chamber of memory and sensation that now included him. His consciousness had become entwined, a new, terrifyingly altered state. He walked to the window, the faint glow of the obsidian shard in his hand reflecting in the ancient glass. The manor had absorbed him, yes, but he had left his mark, a scar that now connected them, an eternal, horrifying symbiosis.